Hello, welcome to Philosophy Roulette 151, where we read some philosophy and try and figure out what's going on live. Reviews of philosophy papers on the interwaves, internet waves, whatever, however we do things nowadays. So let's see what the front page of Phil Papers has. More bioethics. COVID in New York City, what we could be doing better. I may just do this just to see what we could be doing better here in New York. I'm saving that one for later. Asian bioethics review. I hope they're doing better than we are. We're not. Well, we're doing a little bit better than we were. I don't know if we're doing better than they are, though. Uh, Behavioral and brain sciences, very sciencey stuff. Sometimes it's hard to read that, but let's take a look. You know, why not? Oh, look at all this. I guess they just released a new set of papers, bio essays. Not reading something about protein complexes. Bulletin of, being me, I read this as meteorological, not meteorological. Incorporating user values into climate science, climate services. Well, heck, let's take a look. Bulletin of the John Rylands Library. Don't know what this is. Scrapbooks, and so it looks like some sort of interesting stuff. All right. Let's just see if this. So we got 7 pages of how to incorporate user values into climate sciences. I just want to take a look. Full text, it is here. Let's see. Open access. Thank you, American Meteorological Society. Okay, so it's 8 pages, but 2 Okay, so it's risk management and stuff. Okay. Let's see. I'll consider it. Maybe I'll hold on to this for later, but I'm not gonna read it right now. Put it on the queue. No, behavioral and brain sciences. I always enjoy it when someone sends me something to read. It's always good. Let's see. This is 1 page. I don't really believe that, and that's the only thing that's short enough. Otherwise, well, nothing else has page numbers on it. All right, classical chord. Not. Okay, and this is back to where we were. All right, let's just check briefly on page 2, below the fold, all the complexity stuff. Yeah. Yep. Took all these. Diogenes. Have I looked at... I haven't seen anything from Diogenes in a while. For some reason I thought they were... maybe something got switched around about them. Yeah, see... Okay. So they're doing something. Yeah, because I had gone to their website and it looked like it hadn't been updated in a long time. But this is all very strange. Like just sort of German stuffs. Alright, whatever. Can't read that because I can't read German either way. Well, I can read it, I can't understand it. Wouldn't even sound right. Educational philosophy theory. I read one of these a long time ago. Ooh, epistemic. I haven't looked at epistemic in a while. Ethics at instructional philosophy. Oh, interesting. So actually, I haven't looked at educational theory in a bit, and I definitely haven't done epistemic. I should do some epistemic. I like epistemology, or I like some epistemology. Some epistemology just makes me angry. So, the future is always contingent. 1 page. 1 page. 1 page. So what is this? Maybe these are just reviews or something. This is 10 pages on historical thinking and the history educational challenge. Virtues of the educator. Non-word bouillon and non-self Wu Ji. Hey Lego creator, how are you? Let's see, what do we got here? I don't know. I'm gonna go to epistemic. Lego creator. Yeah, I don't accept links, but if you have something like, if you have like a fill paper, like a thing, you can just copy the last like few letters of the publication, like this PARIUV, if you're trying to post me a helpful link to a philosophy, it'd be fine. Let's see, what do we got? Oh. Environmental luck in the structure of understanding. Ooh, cool. That might be fun. Let's see, what is this? No safe haven for the virtuous. Oh, this isn't like an environmental luck issue, because environmental luck. The virtue of curiosity. It's always cute. Assertions, handicaps, social norms. 14 pages. Let's go see what no safe haven for the virtuous looks like. And environmental luck. So that could be cool. Ooh, it's here. That's always... Okay, so we've got 28 pages, but it's double spaced. That's pushing my length here. This is 26 pages and also double spaced, but slightly less double spaced. Let's see, is there anything else of any bit less? Is true belief really a fundamental epistemic value? Now let's see if there's forthcoming things. Prime cuts in the method of recombination. Hmm. 6 pages, I like that. Imagine. Oh, did I read Imagination Can I Justify Empirical Belief? I might have. I think so. The Irrationality of Pluralistic Ignorance, 14 pages. Belief Permissivism. 3 things to do with knowledge. Things, okay. Entitlement, epistemic risk, and skepticism. Click on that too. Alright, let's see. Anything else of interest here of length? Achievement and the value of knowledge. That could be cool too. One more twist. There we go. That's what I want to read. One more twist. Where'd that go? Let's see if it's available. Shucks, not available. It's so sad. Alright. Entitlement. Let's see how long this one is. 18 in double space. That I can handle. Okay, so that's what we're gonna read. Did I read this one? So, alright, we'll do this one here then. If you want to grab the paper, it's in the chat now, and you can also type exclamation point paper if you come in later and you want to grab it. The link will pop back up. And where is I have to download it for reals this time. Cool. Okay, so entitlement, epistemic risk, and skepticism. And please, anyone out there, ask me questions. This is my first time reading it. I will try to make some sense of this, though. Let's find out. Introduction. Some of Crispin Wright's ideas have been playing a pivotal role in recent epistemological conversation. Wright maintains that the architecture of perceptual justification is such that we can acquire justification for our perceptual beliefs only if we have an have antecedent justification for ruling out any skeptical alternative. He contends that this fact doesn't elicit skepticism, for we are non-evidentially entitled to accept the negation of any skeptical alternative. Sebastian Maruzzi has challenged Wright's contention by arguing that since our non-evidential entitlements don't remove the epistemic risk of our perceptual beliefs, they don't actually enable us to acquire justification for these beliefs. In this paper, I show that Wright's response to Maruzzi are ineffective and that Maruzzi's argument is validated by probabilistic reasoning. I also suggest that Wright couldn't answer Maruzzi's challenge without weakening the support available for his conception of the architecture of perceptual justification. This is the paper structure. In section 2, I details Wright's conception of the architecture of perceptual justification and Wright's entitlement theory. In section 3, I review Maruzzi's objection. In section 4, I criticize Wright's response to Maruzzi. In section 5, I argue that Maruzzi's objection is validated by Bayesian reasoning. In 6, I draw my conclusions. Okay, Wright's epistemology of perception. Wright contends that the architecture of perceptual justification is that Pj, a subject S's experience of P gives S defeasible justification for believing P only if S has antecedent justification for accepting not SH, where S not SH is the logical negation of any skeptical alternative SH to P. So you can accept it if you can defeat all the things that might make you skeptical about what just happened. Seems kind of excessive. I mean, how would I know about all the skepticism? Yeah, all the alternatives seems like a lot, so see what they have to say about this. It's any alternative. Any alternative. I don't know all the alternatives. PJ raises at least two concerns. To begin with, it looks at odds with everyday epistemic practices. One may thus doubt that PJ is true. Yeah, that's right. I mean, who goes around and defeating all the skeptical alternatives? Ordinarily, the reasons we attribute to ourselves or others for holding perceptual beliefs make no reference to skeptical alternatives. Imagine you have an experience as if the cat is on the mat, or there's a cat in a hat. You would normally answer this question: what reason do you have to believe that the cat is in a hat? By saying I see it, responding I see it and have independent reason to rule out that I am deceived by the matrix would appear out of place. Yeah, it's definitely not everyday reasoning where you're going through skeptical alternatives. The second concern is that PJ prompts perceptual skepticism. Consider a subject S experiencing as if P, the cat, is on the mat. Suppose SH is the proposition that P is false, but the matrix makes S hallucinate if P. The skeptic may adduce PJ to argue that S's experience as if P gives S justification for believing P only if S has antecedent justification for accepting not SH. So that'd be the skeptical hallucination or whatever. The skeptic will insist that S cannot have this antecedent justification, for any a posteriori evidence S might have to possess can be conjectured to be in turn a hallucinatory state caused by the matrix. Yeah, so any prior reason you have would be just as subject to the skepticism, so you'd have some sort of skeptical meta-induction going on here. Furthermore, S doesn't have any a priori evidence for not SH, so S has no evidence justifying her acceptance of not SH. The skeptic will conclude that S's experience as if P cannot justify S to believe that P, and by generalizing this example, that S's experiences cannot justify any of S's perceptual beliefs. Yeah, because I mean, if one thing's part of the matrix, then so is everything else, and then so how would you rule out the things that you're saying are not part of the matrix when all you're doing is in the matrix? Excuse me. To address the first concern, Wright has argued that the epistemological views that disallow PJ, like Pryor's dogmatism, are in various ways problematic. The only direct argument, and I think the most forceful one, for the truth of PJ is nonetheless a Bayesian one due to White, who defends a view of the architecture of perceptual justification similar to Wright's. So we've got White and Wright. Let me outline White's argument as I will use it later on. White adopts an entrenched model that construes epistemic justification as rational confidence. Let PR be a probability function interpreted subjectively. Probability P expresses S rational confidence that P. PRP given Q expresses S's rational confidence that P conditional on S's learning Q. Suppose E is the proposition that S has an experience as if P, the cat is on the mat, and SH is the proposition that P is false, but the matrix makes S hallucinate as if P. Since SH entails E, if S learns SH, S must be certain that E. Hence, given the probability of the evidence given the skeptical hypothesis equals 1. Since S shouldn't expect to experience as if the cat is on the mat, the evidence is less than 1. Thus, given the evidence with SH versus is greater than just the evidence. This inequality implies that if you throw the negations in, that it would flip around the inequality. Furthermore, since P entails not SH, and then you get the flipped around. Yeah, I hate having to try to read formulas in line. It's just very difficult to do. But basically, look, if you've got evidence and then you've got evidence for a skeptical hypothesis, then you've got, it'll be more than just the evidence of the thing. The last two inequalities imply by transitivity that the evidence is less than that of the skeptical hypothesis. The formula says that if S learns E, S's confidence in P must remain strictly smaller than S's prior confidence in not SH, so not the skeptical hypothesis. Thus, S learning E can make S rationally confident of P's truth only if S is antecedently rational of not SH's truth. This shows that S is experiencing as if P can give S justification for believing P only if S has antecedent justification for accepting not SH. This argument can be reformulated to apply to any perceptual proposition P and any proposition E stating that S experiences as if P and any correlated skepticism alternative SH. This should be capitalized here, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, consistency of variables, please. The conclusion is PC. The probability of P given E is less than the probability of not SH. PC vindicates PJ. So basically, if you already were confident in some that you're not in the matrix, then you can use your just your given perceptual experience, because you don't have the idea that you're in the matrix only really applies if what you prior understood could also be subject to being in the matrix. But if you already understood everything prior to the matrix, it would be irrational to just all of a sudden think you're in the matrix all of a sudden. So you can rule that out based on your prior understanding that you weren't. Now, how you got that initial understanding to begin with that you're relying on, I don't know. But if you know you're not in the matrix, then I guess according to this account, you can then understand that what you see now is, you can just take what you see at face value, because it would be irrational to believe that all of a sudden what you are seeing is a hallucination. You've ruled out the matrix, basically. Although Wright often construes epistemic justification as rational confidence, he hasn't explicitly adduced PC to support PJ. PC is this probability argument here from above. Wright has nevertheless leveled a Bayesian objection to Pryor's dogmatism, consisting of a variant of incomplete version of White's argument. So Wright would endorse this argument. Note that PJ takes S's evidence to be S's experience as if P, where PC takes S's evidence to be S's reflective belief that E. She has an experience as if P. One could question whether S's belief that E constitutes a reliable model of S's experience as if P in epistemic evaluations. Wright nevertheless doesn't distinguish between one's experience and one's reflective belief that one has an experience when discussing skepticism. Wright seems to share White and Sillen's conviction that one's experiences and one's reflective beliefs about one's experiences are interchangeable in most epistemic contexts. Okay, so if you can reflectively understand that you aren't in the matrix, then you can rule out the matrix in sort of on the basis of this history that you have. It's an interesting way. I don't know how I mean, the problem with the matrix is, of course, is you were born into it. In the actual movie, it's not like it was sprung upon anybody. To address the second concern, the worry that PJ elicits skepticism, Wright admits that there is no or very little evidence in support of propositions like not SH. Yet he argues that there is a type of non-evidential justification, called by him entitlement, that all rational subjects possess by default for accepting the logical negation of any skeptical alternative. Really. Acceptance is an attitude more inclusive than belief. Belief entails the acceptance, but the reverse is false. Wright acknowledges that an entitlement to accept not SH is not one to believe not SH. So you don't have to believe that you're not in the matrix, you just have to accept it in some sense. For it is dubious that S could rationally believe a proposition with no or very little evidence for its truth. This thesis is widely held in epistemology nowadays. Wright suggests that the type of acceptance licensed by S's entitlement is a rational trust, or a very similar attitude. Wright's thesis, so this is just, as they said, dogmatism. You say, well, look, we just do this, we have it, it's fine. Wright's thesis that we are entitled to accept propositions like not SH has attracted criticism of various types. For instance, some authors contend that what Wright calls entitlement isn't epistemic justification. Wright has made a good effort to address most of these objections. In the following, I concentrate on an important criticism made in discussion by Sebastiano Moruzzi, which I think hasn't properly been addressed so far. Okay, so how are we to just know that we're not like an evil demon is fooling us and stuff and making this all fake? How do we know we're not in the matrix? He says, look, we just you have to, on Wright's account, you have to rule out all those statements. How do you rule out all those statements? That seems crazy. No one does that. He says, well, you accept that they're all ruled out. And you just leave it there. So, Moruzzi's objection. Moruzzi's challenge exploits a notion of epistemic risk introduced by Wright himself. Wright emphasizes that whenever S accepts a proposition P, the truth of which is insufficiently supported by her evidence, S runs a risk. The one of accepting a proposition as true that is actually false. Since this type of risk is incompatible with S's justifiably believing and knowing P, Wright calls it epistemic risk. More accurately, the relation that Wright claims to hold between epistemic risk and epistemic justification is this. S's accepting P is epistemically risky if and only if S's evidence doesn't suffice to justify her believing P. Note that S's accepting P when P is insufficiently supported by evidence would be epistemically risky even if S's acceptance were justified by an entitlement to P. This is so because this entitlement of S would not rest on or produce any evidence for P's truth. For example, Wright acknowledges that S's accepting not SH would be epistemically risky despite S's entitlement to not SH. So the fact that we accept all these that we rule out we're not in the matrix, that's risky because we've just done that sort of dogmatically without reflection. We don't know, and so maybe there's something built into that statement that is just wrong, even if we think it isn't. Okay, Moruzzi's objection rests on the intuition that for any P and correlated skeptical alternative SH, the epistemic risk of not SH transmits to P. The objection says that since S's accepting not SH is epistemically risky despite S's entitlement to not SH, S's accepting P is also epistemically risky despite S's experiencing as if P. So it's a poisoned well. If you've got some bad entitlements associated with some proposition, those bad entitlements poison the well of where the proposition is too. So there's something wrong with the proposition as well. So the cat in the hat is poisoned by all the bad skeptical alternatives. Consequently, cat on the mat, I should say. Consequently, S's justification for P, depending on S's experience as if P, if any, cannot sustain S's belief that P. If this is true, S's entitlements might permit S to trust perceptual propositions, but they cannot enable S to believe them. The skeptical challenge invited by PJ would remain unanswered in this case. Yeah, alright, so we've got a poisoned well here. So since the well is so big, and basically since you have to rule out all the skeptical alternatives on Wright's account, and by doing that you have some sort of entitlement, but the problem is there's so many there that probably one of them has some sort of weird consequence, and that weird consequence has something to do with the proposition, and so you're believing something weird that has to do with that proposition that you have perceptual. You should be able to just accept without a problem, like the cat is on the mat. Analysis of Wright's response. Wright and Wright, 04 and 2014, have respectively given Maruzzi's objection two different responses. In both papers, Wright insists that no epistemic risk transmits from not SH to P, but the reasons he adduces go in opposite directions. I now criticize both responses in turn. Wright 04 argues that the intuition that the epistemic risk of not SH transmits to P is flawed because it relies on a false assumption. Since the risk involved is that of acceptance of a proposition without knowledge of or evidential justification for its truth, the idea that risk transfers from not SH to P is just the contrapositive of the idea that knowledge and evidential justification transmit from P to S, not SH. So interpreted, then, the worry about epistemic risk is just a version of the discredited assumption that justification is unrestrictedly transmissive. Okay, so it's not poisoning the well. Let's unpack this condensed explanation. The expression evidential justification refers to the justification depending on evidence, that is, a belief or an experience sufficient to sustain belief. Recall that P entails not SH. Wright has argued that evidential justification doesn't always transmit across entailment. S's justification for P resting on evidence, E transmits across the entailment from P to Q, according to Wright, just in case 1, S has justification for believing P from E, 2, S knows P entails Q, and 3, S has justification for believing Q in virtue of the truth of both 1 and 2. Wright claims that 2 remains unsatisfied whenever S is acquiring justification for believing P from E requires S to have antecedent justification for accepting Q. Okay. Suppose, for instance, S has 2 identical copies, H and H star of Hamlet. O is the disjunctive proposition that this book looks like H or H star. A is the proposition that the book is actually H. B is the proposition that the book is not H star. S is acquiring justification for believing A from O requires S to have antecedent justification for accepting B. Suppose that this requirement is met and S learns O by therefore acquiring justification for believing A. So they know that it's the first copy, not the second copy. I mean, yeah, it could have been you could have just said first copy and second copy. Why are, like, it's not this author. It's just like philosophers is how we do stuff. But it's just, could have just said, look, 2 copies, first copy and second copy. And next time I'm doing this, I'm just writing first copy and second copy. I'm not doing variable and variable prime or whatever. It's getting a little maddening to read all these things. And not this author, it's just I'm reading a ton of random papers. This is episode 151. I mean, how much does it help? I don't know. Okay, suppose this requirement and S learns O, thereby acquiring justification for believing A, that they have copied the first copy. And also suppose that 2, S knows that the first copy entails that it's not the second copy. In these circumstances, according to Wright, it is intuitive that S cannot acquire justification for believing B in virtue of the truth of 1 and 2, so 3 is false. This is a case of transmission failure. If Pj is true, the entailment from P to not SH should also instantiate transmission failure, for S is acquiring justification for believing P from her experience, as if P requires S to possess antecedent justification for not SH. Okay, so say you have enough justification to then entail the negation of one of these skeptical consequences. The problem is, what happens then? Because don't you also get the entailment once you accept the proposition? That if you accept the proposition the cat's on the mat, then the cat on the mat implies that you're not in the matrix. So, my best interpretation of Wright's passage quote above is this. If you have the impression that the epistemic risk of not SH transmits to P, this is only because you mistakenly presuppose that evidential justification is unrestrictedly transmissive, so that any evidential justification for P must transmit to SH. In fact, if you presuppose this and realize that S doesn't have evidential justification for not SH, because not SH is epistemically risky, you are bound to conclude on pain of contradiction that S doesn't have justification for believing P either, which means that P is also epistemically risky. This diagnosis is misguided because it confuses S's justification for not SH that S acquires upon experiencing as if P with S's antecedent justification for not SH, resting on S's mere entitlement to SH. Yeah, so we've got 2 different kinds of entailment here. We've got entitlement and then we've got logical entailment. And so if you have just logical entailment and it's like these 2 things are always correlated, then you can go back and forth because it's like an if and only if. Like P implies Q and Q implies P, and or whichever it is, it doesn't matter. Or whichever way you're going. The problem is we're going here versus a weaker notion of some sort of entitlement and not entailment, which I don't know, like how you have to slice that differently. And that's what the author here is criticizing. This entitlement not being being weaker than entailment. You can't make it arbitrarily weaker. Well, like, why? All right, suppose you both endorse PJ and Wright's entitlement theory, but presuppose that the evidential justification is unrestrictedly transmissive. Imagine that you realize that S lacks antecedent justification for believing not SH. Given your presupposition, you can still conclude without contradiction that S has justification for believing not SH, namely evidential justification transmitted to SH from P. Yeah, so you've got this evidential justification from the proposition itself. In fact, note that this justification transmitted to not SH is not antecedent justification for believing SH, which S lacks, but justification that S is supposed to acquire when she experiences as if P and deduces. See, here's the entailment right here. Deduction. Deduces not SH from P. Since you can conclude that S has evidential justification for not SH, you aren't bound to maintain that S lacks evidential justification for P, so that P is epistemically risky. This shows that the intuition that not SH's epistemic risk transmits to P doesn't depend on presupposing mistakenly or not that evidential justification is unrestrictedly transmissive. Okay, so basically, what I think is happening here is that once you've got your entitlement, then you get the proposition. But then with the proposition, that's a very strong thing to have. Then you can go back and then get your then deduce the not mere entitlement, but entailment of the negation of the skeptical hypothesis. So that's what you're getting here. So like you have all this entitlement to believe things, but once you believe them, then you can go back and be like, well, that also means that you've ruled out the skeptical stuff. So it looks a little question begging here is what it is. That or you can't, well, not necessarily question begging on Wright's part, but that the entitlement condition is not what he said it was. Okay. Because it turns into entailment. Wright has given Maurice's objection a novel response. It says that no epistemic risk transmits from not SH to P because SH is not epistemically risky after all. This response appears flawed to me. Let's see. I put this here as I found Wright's discussion. Yeah, see, this is what I was just saying about the question begging bit. It's declaring it not epistemically risky. Yeah, and that's why I checked the footnote there. I put forward this diagnosis more hesitantly as I found Wright's discussion less clear in this case. This is a rather strong statement here as far as philosophy goes. So it's a little worrisome. You're like, why is that? So, you're allowed to attack very strongly ideas, but like someone's argument you have to be very careful about. I've said it before. If someone called, it was actually a good while ago now, someone said someone else has made a Logic 101 mistake in their paper, and the people responded, or at least one of their supporters responded, I don't know who it was. It showed basically that there was no Logic 101 mistake, and it was actually something pretty significant and subtle and good. And so it's like, you never accuse anyone of making such a dumb mistake, because basically these people aren't stupid. They usually don't make it might be representable as a Logic 101 mistake, but that's not why they made the mistake. They didn't make a mistake in like elementary logic. So just a fun fact, or just a suggestion: be very careful when accusing a person of making a silly mistake, because these are not silly people, or at least most of them are not silly people. All right. Although Wright endorses PJ, in this paper, he concedes that evidential justification, when suitably qualified, transmits from P to SH. Wright contends that PJ blocks the transmission of two types of justification. Firstly, no justification transmitted from P to not SH can be a first-time justification for accepting not SH. Okay, so it says you can't do it. You can't get the entailment if this is the first time you're actually believing it. For S can acquire justification for P from experiencing as if P only if S is already justified for accepting SH, not SH. Furthermore, no justification committed to the not skeptical hypothesis thing from P can raise not SH's rational credibility. So you can't make it stronger. Anything from P cannot go back and raise the rational credibility. So the entailment is stronger than the entitlement, and therefore, so this seems a little ad hoc, but that's what the saying is. You can't go back and then bolster your own presuppositions, like pull them up by their bootstraps. Like A implies B, and B is really certain now, so therefore A must be certain too. For whatever limit there was to the rational credibility of not SH as an object of trust, it remains an upper bound on its rational credibility as an object of belief based on the appearance that P. Wright argues that nevertheless, PJ doesn't debar evidential justification from transmitting from P to SH if the justification is neither a first-time justification for accepting the not-skeptical hypothesis, nor one that boosts the not-skeptical hypothesis' credibility. Drawing from Hawthorne and McGlynn, Wright contends that this transmission can persuasively take place through a two-stage inference. Suppose S has evidential justification for P. This justification will first transmit to the disjunction P or not SH, entailed by P. This is so for Wright because it is compelling that any justification for believing either a disjunct of a disjunction is by itself justification for believing the disjunction. So, yeah, this is a weakening. So, S's justification for P or not SH will then transfer to not SH, which is a prior equivalent to the disjunction. Wright thinks that since S is entitled to not SH, S will acquire justification for believing P from her experience as if P, and this evidential justification will transfer to not SH. This would show that Maruzzi's challenge is ultimately dissolved, as we no longer have the assumption in place that there can be no evidential justification for not SH. In other words, we no longer have the assumption that in place that not SH is epistemically risky. Yeah. Okay, let's go see what the author has to say. This response to Maruzzi puts the cart before the horse, begging the question, as I said earlier. Wright contends that evidential justification can transmit from P to not SH. Suppose his explanation is correct. Evidential justification will transmit from P to not SH only if S does have evidential justification for P in the first instance. But Maruzzi's objection was precisely that S couldn't have this justification, given that S's entitlement to not SH cannot remove not SH's epistemic risk, and thus, according to Maruzzi, transmits to P. P must be epistemically risky when S experiences as if P. So S's justification for P based on S's experience as if P, if any, will be unable to sustain S's belief that P. And so there will be no evidential justification to be transmitted from P to not SH in the first instance. Okay, so I mean, I understand what the author is saying here. I don't know how, I haven't read the Wright stuff, the Crispin Wright's paper, so I don't know how accurate this, I mean, I assume it's an accurate representation of the argument, even though the author said it was a little hazy to figure out what was going on. It seems if this is what's going on, then it doesn't look like Crispin Wright had a good argument to begin with. But we'll see. I mean, it goes down to what's probably coming next, the transmission of epistemic risk and how these risky propositions affect each other. Yeah, again, poisoned well. Or I guess we should basically be using the virus transmission metaphors nowadays. So we've got the tracing of if we've got a virus tracing, infection tracing, here we go. Alright, infection tracing of epistemic risk. Although Wright's response to Maruzzi are ineffective, we cannot conclude yet that Maruzzi's objection goes through. For Maruzzi's claim that not SH's epistemic risk transmits to P hasn't been substantiated, so we don't know the actual vector here. In this section, I will show that this claim can be validated through PC once the standard probabilistic account of risk is presupposed. Since this standard account has recently been challenged, I would like to dwell on this issue before proceeding any further. The term risk is customarily taken to refer to the probability of an unwanted event, where this probability is estimated on a relevant body of evidence. This usage is, for instance, exemplified by the statement that on the current medical evidence, the risk that a smoker's life is shortened by some smoking, the risk that a COVID-19's life is the risk to COVID-19's life is approximately 4 times that of regular flu. It might look self-evident that our judgments about risk track probability. Pritchard has nevertheless challenged this thesis with an apparent counterexample. Case 1. Oh, bomb is the example. Oh, people like this example. It's at least the third time I've read it. Case 1. An evil scientist has rigged up a large bomb which he has hidden in a populated area. If the bomb explodes, many people will die. There is no way of discovering the bomb before the time it is set to detonate. The bomb will only detonate, however, if a certain set of numbers come up in the national lottery draw. The odds of these numbers appearing is 14 million to 1. It is not possible to interfere with this lottery draw. Slightly different than the other examples. Okay, so that just seems well, that evil scientist is not really that evil. It's pretty good chance that they wasted their time making that whole bomb thing. Case 2. An evil scientist has rigged up a large bomb which he has hidden in a populated area. If the bomb explodes, many people will die. There is no way of discovering the bomb before the time it is set to detonate. The bomb will only detonate, however, if a series of 3 highly unlikely events obtain. First, the weakest horse in the field at the Grand National, lucky loser, must win the race by at least 10 furlongs. Second, the worst team remaining in the FA Cup draw, Accrington Stanley, must beat the best team remaining, Manchester United, by at least 10 goals. And third, the Queen of England must spontaneously choose to speak a complete sentence of Polish during her next public speech. The odds of this chain of events occurring are 14 million to 1. It is not possible to interfere with the outcomes of any of the events in this chain. That's a fun example. Pritchard observes that although the unwanted event, the bombs detonate, is equally likely in both cases, its risk in case 1 is intuitively higher than in case 2. For we have the feeling that despite the detonation triggering events have equal chances in both cases, the detonation triggering event in case 1 could happen more easily than the detonation triggering case 2. I don't agree to that. If you're going to declare this to be 14 million to 1 right here, and declare 14 million to 1 over here, then they are exactly the same. This is like one of those, what weighs more, a pound of feathers or a pound of steel or a pound of metal. I think it's playing on different intuitions, but if it's actually a pound or it's actually 14 million to 1, that is exactly equal. I just don't believe that you can calculate the stuff in case 2 to be 14 million to 1. This is a much more certain calculation in case 1 than it is in case 2. All that is needed for the detonation triggering event in case 1 to materialize is simply that a few numbered balls be extracted in a particular sequence. In contrast, the detonation triggering event in case 2 could take place only if many weird things took place altogether. No, see, again, this is me losing the intuition here. If you're going to declare it this way, then it's like saying a pound of feathers and a pound of lead. They're exactly the same pound, although there's a huge number of other things going on there. To explain our intuitions about risk elicited by cases like bomb, Pritchard develops a modal conception of risk alternatives to the probabilistic one. Pritchard explicates the notion of easy probability by exploiting the familiar idea that possible worlds are more or less close to the actual world, in the sense that they are more or less similar to it. He submits that an event could easily happen just in case the closest world in which it takes place are very similar to the actual world. An event that could happen more easily than another just in case the closest world in which it takes place are more similar to the actual one and the closest world in which the other event occurs. The detonation triggering event in case 1 could happen more easily than the detonation triggering event in case 2 because the closest world in which it takes place are more similar to the actual one than the closest world in which other events occur. This works on the closeness of worlds, which I'm on record of saying I absolutely disgust. This drives me crazy. It's sort of I've read one paper actually on how to define closeness of worlds. I mean, it was a good paper. I still wasn't convinced, but like this again seems like cognitive load stuff. Like a pound of feathers is big and a pound of lead is small. So like moving the pound of feathers seems like it's a big task. It's like cognitively heavy. That's all I can think of is going on here. And a pound of lead is like, it only takes up like that amount of space. And I mean, so for you metric people, like half a kilogram or something. Whatever. But like it's much more of an unwieldy thing to think about these three, like the Queen deciding to speak in Polish all of a sudden. But the fact that the numbers come up. I mean, if you're a mathematician, you understand how mind-bogglingly small that chance is, and so you wouldn't think of it. Maybe if you had different intuitions, you would think of it differently. Especially if you were very well versed in numbers, which I'm not. But if it's exactly 14 million to 1, it's exactly 14 million to 1. It has nothing to do with the worlds. Maybe there's an epistemic component here, but that's not going to change the probabilities. And I don't see how the modal account does it either. Then this is not a criticism of this author here. It's just my fight with closeness of worlds. When I say I've lost all my intuitions about things, that's basically, it comes down. It can be described as I have no close worlds. All the worlds are sort of flat to me. Some of them are very far away, I guess, but everything is mostly far away. In this account, the degree of risk of an unwanted event is proportional to its modal distance from the actual world rather than its likelihood. Precisely, the degree of risk of a proposition P describing a given event is determined by the degree of closeness to the actual world of the closest world in which P is true. The closer these worlds, the higher the risk. Suppose now that P states that the bomb is detonating. Since P is true in very close worlds in case 1, but only remotely worlds in case 2, P proves more risky in case 1 than in case 2. I mean, that just seems like you're giving me your intuitions, which is fine, actually. It's not a problem that you say it's more intuitive in that case to you. But, yeah. Okay, Bricker 2018 observes that Pritchard's modal account, if working at all, would also explain cases in which our judgments seem to track probability, since probability and modal ordering are often correlated. For example, note that your serious bodily injuring yourself from playing chess is both a very improbable event and one that happens only in very remote worlds. Yeah, chess is not high impact usually. The modal account of risk would thus be capable of handling cases that the probabilistic account cannot handle, but also cases that appear to suggest that risk tracks probability. It is far from clear, however, that Pritchard's account constitutes the correct analysis of risk, or that it should be preferred to the probabilistic account. Pritchard's reasons to reject the probabilistic account primarily hinge on our intuitive judgments about risk elicited by bomb. Pritchard thinks that the best explanation of why we make these judgments is that we apply his modal notion of risk, which we would implicitly possess. But this argument can be questioned. The judgments elicited by bomb might simply stem from our heuristics, cognitive biases, or similar psychological factors. Okay, so the author is mostly on board with criticisms of this account. So these judgments might be no evidence that a pre-theoretical conception of risk is akin to that outlined by Pritchard. For instance, note that the degree probability of the detonation triggering in case 2 has been stipulated. No explanation of how it has been worked out is offered. Since the numerical values supplied by Pritchard looks terribly far-fetched, it is perhaps natural that we, our subpersonal cognitive systems, tend to ignore that piece of information. If this is true, psychology can offer various explanations of why we end up judging that the unwanted event is less risky in case 2 than in case 1. Some explanations are compatible with probabilistic account of risk. For instance, Kahneman and Tversky have shown that there is a positive correlation between how easily a subject simulates, that is, mentally pictures an event, and how probable she estimates that event is. Note that the detonation triggering event in case 2 is far less easy to simulate than the detonation triggering an event in case 1. Yeah, this is basically, I agree with this analysis. This is what I was saying, the mental difficulty in thinking of how of certain things, the cognitive load is what I was saying. And this is the mentally pictures. Okay. So, why did the author say all this then? Let's find out. The modal account of risk has counterintuitive consequences that the probabilistic account doesn't imply. Suppose that you are about to flip a coin, see that you know to be fair, and you have bet 100 pounds on heads, while your opponent has bet 100 pounds on tails. Yeah, I was just talking about pounds before, but I was not these pounds. If you win, you get 100 pounds, otherwise you lose 100. It is intuitive that before seeing the outcome, you should judge a proposition that C lands tails. Right, to be considerably risky. And probability account explains why, given your evidence, the chance that the unwanted event P takes place is 1/2. The modal account provides an alternative explanation. Your evidence allows that you conclude that the possible world in which P are true are very close. Imagine now that C lands heads and that you see it. In light of your new evidence, you should no longer judge P to be risky to any extent. This is straightforwardly explained by the probabilistic count. The new evidence indicates that P's chance has dropped to 0. However, on the modal count, you are still rationally required to take P to be risky to some degree, for your new evidence still allow you to conclude that the worlds in which P are true are very close. But not as close as the other one, which is the actual world now. Okay, in those worlds, you don't see land's heads, you see land's tails, but this doesn't make them remote worlds. More generally, on the modal count, any event that could have easily happened but is known not to happen must be taken to be risky to some extent. This doesn't match the intuitive idea of risk. As Hansen has emphasized, risks are always connected to lack of knowledge. If we know that no explosion will take place, there is no reason to talk about risk. Producing a thorough assessment of the modal account of risk would take us too far afield. Let me only add that Pritchard has attempted to defend his account by showing that it can illuminate Baum, but also by describing independent supporting evidence be available in psychology and cognitive sciences. Bricker has nonetheless adduced alternative empirical evidence that looks incompatible with Pritchard's modal account. Importantly, Bricker has also detailed an imagery case similar to Baum that prompts judgment about risks that appear unexplainable by both the modal count and the probabilistic count. This interesting dispute is far from being settled. My view is that to investigate whether epistemic risk transmits, we don't need to produce the correct analysis of risk. There might be no such analysis. Perhaps our pre-theoretical conception of risk is partly incoherent or indeterminate and admits of more than just one analysis or specification. To investigate whether or not epistemic risk transmits, we only need to rely on the notion of risk sufficiently close to the one that Wright and Maruzzi presuppose in their dispute. There is no reason to think that Wright and Maruzzi adopt a conception of risk different from the orthodox one, which is probabilistic. It is also noteworthy that if Wright endorsed Pritchard's modal conception of risk, he would face a kind of conceptual incoherence, for he would have to acknowledge that there are many propositions of the acceptance of which is epistemically risky, but simultaneously not risky. To see this, remember that Wright holds that thanks to our entitlements to rule out all skeptical alternatives, our perceptual beliefs are normally justified. Wright is thus committed to taking the actual world to be broadly as it appears to be, and so taking any skeptical conjecture SH to be true only in remote possible worlds. Consider now any conjecture SH of this type. If Wright adopted the modal conception of risk, he would need to acknowledge that although our best evidence cannot justify believing SH, not SH, so that accepting not SH is epistemically risky, accepting not SH is not risky. So for not SH is false only in remote possible worlds. Alright, so basically, if you try to switch the account of risk here, you still get transmission, basically. So that's, I guess, the upshot of the last section. Let me now show that once the probabilistic count of risk is presupposed, Maruzzi's claim that epistemic risk transmits can be validated through PC. Take any perceptual proposition P, a proposition E stating that S experiences as if P, and any correlated skeptical alternative SH. The degree of risk that not SH is false is expressed by RS sub F, not SH. Degree of risk, alright. Risk of S can be identified with the probability of the skeptical hypothesis, where the probability is a probability function interpreted subjectively. The degree of risk that P is false given E, expressed by RSP given E, can be identified with the other stuff earlier, formulas, and this states that the degree of risk that P is false given the evidence is strictly higher than the degree of risk that not the skeptical hypothesis is false, independent of the evidence. So RS validates Maruzzi's claim that not SH, not the skeptical hypothesis, epistemic risk transmits to P. To see this, take R to be a threshold value of epistemic risk. In other words, suppose that whenever R is exceeded by a proposition, the risk that it is false is so high that S is believing that proposition would be unjustified. Okay, RS entails that given the risk then, that is to say, if S is accepting not SH, not the skeptical hypothesis on the basis of a non-evidential entitlement, and so prior to learning E is epistemically risky, S is accepting P upon learning E is also epistemically risky. Okay, so basically, given the probability account, you're going to get transmission of risk one way or the other, depending on how you, regardless of how you cash out risk. in terms of epistemological risk, modal or probabilistic. Okay, concluding remarks. Since it is plausible that the epistemic risk of not SH transmits to P, Wright's entitlement theory appears unable to neutralize the skeptical challenge arising from PJ. Wright still has some space for maneuver, though. He could try to argue that White's Bayesian model is unreliable or misleading. For example, he might contend that probability calculus is ill-suited to model our rational confidence when we reflect on outlandish conjectures like those adduced by the skeptic. As already suggested, Wright could also challenge the assumption at the heart of White's model that one... do we spell heart this way? I don't know. Of White's model that one experiences and one's reflective beliefs that one has an experience are relevantly similar in terms of justifying power. If responses like these were to succeed, however, Wright should drop the apparent convincing case for PJ made by White. One way or another, Wright's epistemology of perception would be endangered. Yeah, because if you start doing this stuff, then you start losing your the mathematical backing that was given by White, the Bayesian reasoning. Okay. Alright, any questions out there? This was like a sort of a focused essay, so this is not bad. I don't have too much more to say. It went through a few different cases is what it did. It says, look, if you have this sort of way of arguing for stuff about your justification of perceptual things, then you have to rule out skeptical alternatives. And ruling out skeptical alternatives seems a little too strong here. And they went through and they developed a few different ways to argue against this, based on Maruzzi. Maruzzi. So nothing much else to say. It was a nice paper, and nothing too exciting because it was a very focused paper. It was just Wright has not sufficiently responded to certain objections, and that's fine. But yeah, nice paper. Hope everyone enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any questions. Send me suggestions of things to read. I think I might not come. I might be a little busy tonight, so maybe tonight or maybe tomorrow. Otherwise, tomorrow morning I'll be back for another paper. Have a good day, everybody, and be well. Stay safe.